human beings, except the right of self-incrimination under the Fifth Amendment. And because of the unique nature of limited liability, perpetual life, subsidiaries, holding companies, escapes from jurisdictions, control of capital, labor, and technology, they can produce privileges and immunities far, far, far in excess of even the richest individual human being. In doing so, they have subverted some of our most fundamental democratic procedures and rights. In their relentless thirst for power, which is their dynamic, they are moving to restrict access to the courts by consumers, by wrongfully injured people, by small businesses. They have virtually destroyed the binary quality of freedom of contract, except between themselves or between other parties of significant power, an occasional labor union. We are all told and made to sign on a dotted line with standard form contracts. 3 million small businesses sign on a dotted line with unilaterally imposed draconian franchise agreements. The two pillars of our legal system we are taught in law school are tort law and contract law. And they are being corporatized and taken away from us year by year. The swarm of power by corporations in federal, state, and local governments is an extraordinary performance. Every single agency and department in the U.S. government is subjected internally and externally to the overwhelming influence of corporations, including the Labor Department, which was designed to be controlled by workers or unions. They do this by putting their executives in high office. They do this by establishing 10,000 political action committees, pouring money into the campaigns of legislators and presidents and vice presidents. They do this by fielding at least 35,000 full-time lobbyists. And it's very cost-effective for them as they link their power with their dealers and agents and other networks throughout the country. The drug companies, for example, a little over 2.5 years ago, spent about $250 million on Congress with about 450 full-time lobbyists. And they got the drug benefit bill, which is probably the greatest corporate subsidy they've ever received, and even larger than their tax credits and the free research and development they get from the National Institutes of Health. And they also tied Uncle Sam's hands, preventing our government from negotiating the drug prices for the drugs that the taxpayers are going to have to pay for. These corporate conquistadores know no limits to what power they want to accumulate or to what they want to sell us. If you ask Lockheed Martin how many weapon systems are enough, they would say as many as we can sell. If you ask Disney how many programs for children would they want to inflict in terms of hours per day, they would say as many as we can sell them. The lack of any limits contradicts the very nature of our constitutional system, which is built on limits, which is why these corporations have increasingly become extra-constitutional. The power of these corporations is indicated in many ways, but one way is a curious one. There have never been more exposés in the mainstream and progressive media of corporate abuses as there are today. I think there are probably 20 times more books, articles, and programs coming out on a huge variety of corporate crimes, fraud, abuse, deceptions, manipulations, payoffs than there was in the 60s. And there's never been less impact from these disclosures. The more disclosures, the more exposés, the less impact. Because the companies have tied up the processes of accountability in all directions. A comment about these corporations has been made that they are huge generators of wealth. And that is true. It's just amazing to watch the accumulation of capital. Not very many people understand how this occurs, but it is occurring. Only 20 or 25 years ago, there was a group in Washington devoted to the capital formation shortage and what to do about it, mostly through greater tax breaks were the recommendation. Now the Wall Street Journal reports that corporations are so flush with capital, with cash, that they don't know what to do with it, so they're buying back their stock. Billions of dollars per company. The Wall Street Journal reports that private equity firms have so much cash, they're roaming the world trying to see what they can buy up. At the same time of these mountains of cash, the necessities of the people for capital investment are not being responded to. Mountains of cash going into buyouts, going into areas of the economy that are removed from the daily necessities of the American people, illustrates the disconnect between economic growth and the distributive effects for the well-being of the people from the expansion of the economy. The economy keeps growing and growing and growing, and yet 80% of the American people have wages less adjusted for inflation than those in 1973, which is the peak year for wages in the United States. The economy keeps growing and growing, and the number of people and children in poverty keeps expanding. In California, 48% of all children live in poverty or a category known as near poverty in the Golden State, where some of the most spectacular fortunes were made. There's a disconnect between the growth of the economy and the continual growth of people without health insurance, or who are underinsured, or who fall through the various cracks of exclusions, deductions, exemptions, even if they are insured. There's a disconnect between the growing size of our economy and the crumbling clinics, libraries, recreation facilities, schools in city after city, the crumbling public works. There is a disconnect between the size of our economy and the destruction of the traditional pension system in our country, the attack on Social Security. There's a disconnect in many ways in terms of the public's ability to have an impact on foreign economic and military policy. As the economy becomes larger and larger, it becomes more dependent on international forces beyond the control of the American people. The trade agreements are illustrative of a further expansion of corporate hegemony around the world, WTO and NAFTA. Given all this corporate power, we do not ask them to express it in a civic way, do we? Have you ever seen anybody or any group sign petitions asking the top major 300 corporations to oppose the Iraq War?